The hospital smelled of antiseptic, sharp and unwelcoming, while the fluorescent lights buzzed above like angry bees. John walked into the room, his chest tightening as though the walls were closing in. His father lay there, pale against the white sheets, wires and monitors clinging to him like chains. A doctor turned toward John, his eyes heavy with the burden of words no one wants to say. The silence stretched before it shattered. The doctor said, "I'm sorry. There's nothing more we can do." John's ears rang, the sentence echoing, threatening to crush him. His knees trembled, and for a moment, he thought the ground might give way. His Margaret's cry pierced the stillness, raw and broken, while John stood frozen, fighting to breathe. He whispered, "No. Please, not yet." His father's chest rose shallowly, fragile as paper. John stepped closer, every movement heavy, his heart screaming with denial. Fear, despair, and grief all tangled inside him. He had never felt so powerless, and in that moment, the weight of love and loss bore down, stealing the air from his lungs. The room felt smaller with every passing second, as though grief itself pressed against the walls. John swallowed hard, his throat raw, his chest burning with the effort to breathe. His Margaret's sobs echoed like shards of glass cutting through silence. The machines kept their steady rhythm, an unbearable reminder of what little time remained. John said, "Dad, it's me. I'm here." His father stirred faintly, lids fluttering as if dragging open against gravity. The man who once carried him on broad shoulders now looked fragile, bones sharp beneath skin. Memories flashed in John's mind. Childhood laughter, strong arms lifting him above waves, his father's voice teaching him how to stand tall. Those images collided with the present, tearing him apart. His father whispered, lips trembling, "Stay strong. For her." John blinked, gripping his father's hand tightly. His Margaret collapsed deeper into her chair, her face hidden in trembling hands. He whispered back, "I don't know if I can." The words stuck like thorns, tearing his heart even as they left his mouth. John leaned closer, the world shrinking to the sound of his father's shallow breaths. His chest heaved, a rhythm out of sync with the machines. "Dad," he whispered, "I'm not ready." His father's lips curved faintly, almost a smile, though pain edged every line in his face. "We're never ready, son," he rasped, voice brittle but steady. Tears rolled hot down John's cheeks, but he did not wipe them. They belonged there, as much as the air in his lungs. His father's hand twitched weakly, brushing his son's knuckles, fragile but deliberate. John remembered being small, clinging to that same hand while crossing busy streets, never doubting its strength. Now it felt like gripping paper, thin and fleeting. His Margaret's sobs broke again, louder, shaking the silence. John turned toward her but found no words, only anguish. He faced his father once more, his voice trembling. "Don't leave me yet, please." The machines beeped steadily, each sound a cruel countdown of seconds slipping away. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have, each second dragging like an anchor. John's stomach churned as he stared at the monitors, lines rising and falling like fragile waves. His father's chest rattled, a soft groan escaping his lips. John's Margaret whispered, "Why him? Why now?" Her words cracked with anguish. John squeezed his father's hand tighter, desperate for a response, terrified of silence. "Dad, you've always been my strength," John said, voice breaking. "What am I supposed to do without you?" The weight of those words hung in the air, heavy as stone. His father's eyes flickered open briefly, gaze unfocused but warm, as if seeing through pain. "Live, John," he whispered faintly. "Live." Tears burned John's eyes as his Margaret gasped beside him, her face buried in trembling palms. The truth pressed into him, cruel yet undeniable. This was goodbye, whether spoken or not. The machines hummed, steady but cold, a cruel contrast to the trembling warmth of human touch. John bowed his head, pressing his forehead against his father's hand. His chest heaved as sobs fought for release. "I can't lose you," he whispered, though the truth already loomed. His father's breath wheezed shallow, fading like a candle struggling in the wind. John's Margaret stood finally, her face streaked with tears, her hands trembling as they reached for her husband's other hand. The family huddled close, bound by love and fear, time shrinking into fragile moments. His father's voice, barely a breath, whispered, "Remember who you are." John's heart split open, words lodging deep in his soul. He nodded furiously, choking on grief, unable to speak. The sound of monitors filled the silence, cruel and unyielding, each beep like a hammer striking his chest. He knew the moment was slipping away, and he clung to it, desperate for it never to end. The night dragged into morning, yet John couldn't recall closing his eyes. He sat slumped in the hospital chair, his father's labored breathing echoing faintly. The room smelled of medicine, and the weight of dread pressed on every inch of him. His Margaret dozed uneasily nearby, her head tilted against the chair back, streaks of dried tears on her face. John whispered to himself, "I can't lose him, not yet." His words dissolved into the stale air. He remembered being 10, chasing baseballs in the yard, his father's laughter carrying across the grass like sunlight. The memory clashed cruelly with the present, where strength was replaced by fragility. A nurse entered quietly, adjusting the monitors, her eyes filled with practiced compassion. John looked up, his own hollow gaze meeting hers. She gave a soft nod, no words spoken, yet he understood. The end loomed near. His chest tightened, his heart pounding. The thought of stepping into a world without his father tore him apart. Hours felt like days, and every beep of the monitor carved deeper into John's heart. He pressed his palms against his face, muffling a cry. His father's words echoed in his memory. "Be strong." But strength felt impossible. His Margaret stirred awake, her eyes swollen, and she whispered, "He's still fighting." John forced a nod, though doubt gnawed inside him. He looked down at his father's frail body, remembering the man who once stood tall and proud, guiding him through life's storms. His throat burned as he whispered, "I need you." The stillness of the room amplified his desperation. His Margaret reached out and placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice fragile but filled with quiet determination. John wanted to believe her, but the heaviness of the moment left him suffocating. Grief lingered in every breath, every glance, every second they shared with him still alive. The morning sun rose higher, but its warmth never touched the room. John stood, pacing slowly, each step heavy as though carrying invisible chains. His father's breathing grew weaker, the sound rattling, tearing at John's resolve. His Margaret murmured prayers softly under her breath, clinging to fragile hope. John pressed his palm against the window, watching light scatter across the glass. "Why now?" he whispered bitterly, his reflection staring back hollow and pale. He remembered his father's lessons: integrity, courage, never backing down. Yet he felt like a boy again, lost and terrified. He turned, locking eyes with his Margaret, whose silent tears betrayed her strength. "He believed in you," she whispered shakily. The words pierced through John's fear, leaving him trembling. He dropped into the chair again, clutching his father's hand, desperate to hold on to every second. Every memory, every word, every moment, they mattered more now than ever before. The weight of silence was unbearable. John sat forward, elbows on knees, face buried in his hands. He felt his body shake, a mix of exhaustion and dread. His father stirred faintly, and John's head snapped up. The old man's eyes fluttered, glassy but searching. John leaned in, gripping his hand. "I'm here, Dad," he whispered. A faint smile touched his father's lips before fading again. John swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, tears burning. His Margaret's hand brushed his arm, steadying him. "You'll find a way," she said softly, her voice cracked but firm. The monitors beeped, the sound slicing through the fragile calm. John leaned closer, forehead nearly touching his father's. "I'll make you proud," he whispered, voice breaking. His father's eyelids fluttered again, a weak attempt at acknowledgement. The moment seared itself into John's soul, etched in grief and love. The day stretched endlessly, each moment both precious and unbearable. John sat upright again, exhausted but unwilling to move. His Margaret whispered to him, "He's holding on because of us." The words sank deep, twisting inside him. He looked at his father, every line of his face carved by years of love, sacrifice, and strength. John whispered, "Thank you for everything," his voice raw. His father's lips parted slightly, a faint sound escaping that John could not fully hear. He leaned closer, desperate. His father whispered, barely audible, "Love, always." John broke, tears spilling freely. He pressed his forehead to his father's hand once more. His Margaret reached across the bed, her hand joining theirs, the three connected in a fragile circle of love. The machines continued their steady rhythm, a cruel reminder that time was short. Yet in that moment, love outweighed fear, even as loss loomed. John stumbled into the hospital hallway, his chest heaving as though the air itself weighed too much. He pressed his back against the cold wall, sliding down until he sat on the floor, his hands tangled in his hair. The world blurred around him, nurses rushing past, machines beeping faintly, his Margaret whispering prayers in the distance. He felt like a child again, terrified and small. His father's words still echoed in his ears. "Stay strong," John muttered. "How can I?" His voice cracked, barely audible over the hum of the corridor. He thought of his father's lessons: discipline, responsibility, courage. Yet now, all he wanted was to escape. His legs trembled, but he forced himself to stand, his fists clenched. He whispered to himself, "I have to be more than this." The weight of grief mixed with fear of what came next. And in that moment, John realized his strength was being tested in ways he never imagined. John's phone buzzed in his pocket, startling him. He pulled it out with trembling hands and saw his sister's name on the screen. He hesitated before answering, dreading her voice. "How is he?" she asked, her tone already breaking. John swallowed hard. "Not good," he whispered. Silence stretched before her sobs came through the line. John closed his eyes, pressing the phone to his forehead. "I can't do this alone," he admitted softly. His sister cried, "You're not alone, we're all here with you." But the truth was harsher. She was miles away, and John felt abandoned. He leaned against the cold wall again, the phone heavy in his hand. He whispered, "He's slipping away." The words nearly destroyed him. His sister's voice steadied faintly. "Stay with him, John. That's what matters now." He nodded, though she could not see, his heart aching, knowing every moment could be the last. Returning to his father's bedside, John found the room colder than before. His Margaret sat rigid, her hands clasped tight, lips moving in silent prayer. John took his father's hand again, squeezing firmly, though it felt fragile as glass. "I'm here, Dad," he whispered. His father's eyelids fluttered, a faint groan escaping. John leaned closer, desperate. "Please, fight a little longer." The beeping of the monitors filled the silence, cruel reminders of life hanging by threads. His Margaret glanced at him, eyes red and hollow. "We must be strong," she whispered, her voice trembling. John felt the words cut into him. Strength was all his father ever demanded, yet now it felt like an impossible burden. He kissed his father's hand, tears dampening the frail skin. "I'll stay," he whispered. His heart felt like it was shattering, piece by piece, but he refused to let go. The hours crawled, each second sharpened by fear. John sat by the window, watching sunlight stretch across sterile tiles. He felt trapped between hope and despair. His father's breathing faltered again, and John jumped to his side, gripping his hand. His Margaret whispered, "He's fading." John shook his head violently. No, not yet. His voice cracked, the denial burning through him. He leaned closer, desperate for signs of life. His father's chest rose faintly, shallow as a whisper, and John's breath matched the rhythm. "Don't leave me," he whispered fiercely, his voice trembling. His Margaret's sobs filled the room, raw and unrelenting. John looked at her, heart breaking at her helplessness. He returned his gaze to his father, his tears falling unchecked. The fragility of life weighed on him like never before. He realized love could not shield him from the inevitable. John's body ached from hours of stillness, but he refused to leave his father's side. The clock ticked endlessly, a cruel reminder of slipping time. He remembered his father teaching him how to ride a bike, falling over and over until he finally balanced. "You never gave up on me," John whispered. His father's lips twitched faintly, a shadow of a smile. John clung to it, desperate for connection. His Margaret placed her hand on his shoulder, whispering, "He hears you." John nodded, swallowing hard. He brushed his father's hand with his thumb, memorizing every line, every scar, every fragile detail. "I'll carry your lessons," he whispered firmly, though his voice cracked. The words were a promise, fragile but real. He bowed his head, resting it against his father's arm. In that moment, John felt the depth of love and loss merge, heavy and unrelenting. John sat in the dim room, exhaustion dragging at him. His father's breaths were shallow, fading like echoes. He whispered, "I can't lose you," voice trembling. His Margaret stood at the window, tears streaming silently. The beeping of machines carved deep into John's nerves, a cruel rhythm of inevitability. His heart felt like it was breaking piece by piece, yet he forced himself to hold his father's hand tighter. The weight of waiting gnawed at John. He stood pacing by the bed, his fists clenched, jaw trembling. His Margaret whispered prayers, her voice raw. John said, "I need to be strong, but I don't know how." His father stirred faintly, lips moving without sound. John leaned close, desperate to catch words that never formed. His knees buckled as grief overtook him, pulling him to the bedside once more. John's phone buzzed again, the sound intrusive in the stillness. He ignored it, unable to bear speaking. His Margaret said, "Your sister is worried." He shook his head, muttering, "I can't tell her what's happening. I can't make it real." His voice cracked, each word cutting deep. His Margaret placed her hand gently on his arm, whispering, "You don't have to carry this alone." John closed his eyes, tears falling freely. The clock ticked loudly, every second like a hammer. John leaned over his father, whispering, "I'll carry your strength, Dad." His father's hand twitched faintly, a weak squeeze that sent shivers through him. His Margaret gasped softly, tears spilling. John pressed his forehead against his father's hand, clinging as if he could hold him here. He whispered, "Please, stay with me just a little longer." Night returned, shadows filling the corners. John sat still, his body trembling with fatigue. His Margaret whispered, "You should rest." He shook his head, voice raw. "I won't leave him." The room was silent, except for shallow breaths and machine beeps. John's heart ached with helplessness, but he knew one truth. He would not abandon his father, not until the very end. The silence was pierced by John's father's sudden whisper. His lips trembled, words escaping faintly. "There's something you don't know." John leaned closer, panic in his eyes. "What is it?" His father's gaze sharpened briefly, filled with pain and truth. "I kept something from you." John's chest tightened, confusion surging. His Margaret froze, her hands trembling. "Not now," she pleaded, tears flowing. But his father pressed on, voice raw, "You need to hear this." John gripped his hand tighter, fear coursing through him. His father whispered again, "Weaker, you are stronger than I ever told you, but you must forgive me for the lies I hid." John's world tilted. The man he trusted carried secrets, and the truth began to crack the fragile ground beneath him. John's heart hammered as his father continued, each word labored. I wasn't always the man you thought I was." His voice cracked, breath shallow. John shook his head, whispering, "Don't do this now." His father's eyes filled with regret. "I made choices, mistakes, that shaped your life." His Margaret cried softly, pressing her hand to her mouth. John's mind raced, his chest burning. "What are you saying?" he demanded, his voice trembling. His father coughed weakly, then whispered, "You deserve the truth." The weight of it crushed John's spirit. His world, already fragile, now spun with doubt and anger. He gripped the bedrail, his body trembling. "Dad, please," he begged, torn between needing to know and fearing the answer. His father's silence hung heavy, his eyes closing briefly before opening again, dim with exhaustion, but determined. The room seemed to close in. John's father whispered again, "Your life wasn't shaped by chance." John froze, his pulse pounding. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice sharp. His father's chest heaved, oxygen mask fogging with effort. "I hid the truth about our family to protect you." His Margaret sobbed, her head shaking violently. "He deserves to know," she cried. John's stomach churned, dread rising like fire. "What truth?" His father's voice wavered, frail but urgent. "The choices I made hurt others, but I thought I was sparing you." John felt the floor vanish beneath him, grief turning to fury. His father's words painted his life in shadows he never saw. He whispered, "You lied to me." His father's eyes welled with tears, regret etched deep. "Yes, but I always loved you." John's tears fell freely, torn between love and betrayal, his heart breaking in new ways. John's fists clenched, his body trembling as he whispered, "All these years, and you hid this?" His father's voice faltered. "I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong." His Margaret reached for John, her hand shaking. "Please, don't let this destroy you." John pulled away, tears burning his vision. "How can I believe in anything now?" His father coughed, his face etched with agony. "Because love was never a lie. Every word I gave you, every lesson, it was real." John's heart twisted painfully. He wanted to scream, to walk out, but his feet wouldn't move. His father whispered again, "Don't let anger define you. Be stronger than I was." John stood in silence, his breath shaking, his heart a battlefield of love and betrayal. The silence pressed like a storm. John stood frozen, staring at the man he had always seen as unshakable. His father's chest rattled, voice breaking. "I failed in ways you'll never know, but I never stopped loving you." John's heart cracked under the weight of those words. His Margaret wept softly, her hands covering her face. John whispered, "Why now? Why tell me when it's too late?" His father's breath shuddered, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Because love demands truth even when it hurts, and you must carry both." John fell into the chair, his body shaking violently. His tears poured, hot and relentless. He whispered, "I don't know if I can forgive you." His father's frail hand lifted weakly, touching his son's wrist. "You will, because your heart is bigger than mine." John pressed his face into that fragile hand, torn apart, love and pain fused as one. The air in the hospital room felt heavy, every breath a struggle against silence. John sat rigid beside the bed, his father's frail hand locked in his own. His Margaret's quiet sobs filled the corners, but John barely heard them. He whispered, "I don't know how to live with this truth." His father's lips moved, voice faint but firm. "You will, because love makes you stronger." John shook his head violently, tears falling. "You broke me," he admitted, pain dripping with every word. His father's eyes, dull with exhaustion, still carried a glimmer of fire. "I gave you everything I had," he whispered. "Even my failures were lessons." John felt his heart twist, torn between anger and devotion. He leaned close, forehead pressing against his father's hand. "I don't want lessons, I want you." His father's labored breath rasped in reply, Then hold me now, and remember who you are. The monitors beeped in steady rhythm, but each sound felt like a countdown. John straightened suddenly, his voice cracking. Don't leave me with questions, please. His father's eyes fluttered open, heavy with regret and love. He whispered, answers aren't what save you. Love is. John gritted his teeth, frustration bubbling. That's not enough. His Margaret touched his shoulder gently, whispering, it has to be. John turned to her, eyes wild. How do I forgive him? She shook her head, tears flowing. Because he's your father, and forgiveness is the last gift you can give. John's chest heaved, breath uneven. He leaned close, whispering fiercely, I'll try. His father's lips twitched, forming the faintest smile. That's all I need. The words pierced John, anchoring him even as grief surged, pulling him into a storm he could not escape. John's body shook as anger spilled into grief. He rose, pacing the room, fists clenched. You should have told me years ago, he cried. His father coughed weakly, whispering, I was afraid you'd hate me. John froze, chest burning. And now? His father closed his eyes, whispering, now, I hope you see me as a man who loved, even when he failed. John felt his breath catch, the words sinking deep. His Margaret stood quietly, hands folded against her lips, her tears steady. John turned back, collapsing into the chair, covering his face. I don't know how to let go. His father's hand moved weakly, brushing John's fingers. By living, he whispered. John dropped his hands, eyes wet, heart heavy. He realized the battle wasn't to keep his father alive, but to carry him forward when he was gone. The room fell into silence, heavy and suffocating. John sat again, his hands trembling as he clasped his father's. Tell me one last thing, he whispered, voice raw. His father's chest rattled, each breath a battle. Slowly he whispered, never forget you're enough. The words cracked open John's heart. His Margaret gasped softly, covering her mouth with both hands. John pressed his lips to his father's hand, whispering, I'll carry you forever. His father's eyes closed briefly, a single tear trailing down his wrinkled cheek. John felt it like fire in his soul, searing him with both pain and love. He whispered again, I love you. His father's lips parted faintly, mouthing the same words, though no sound came. The monitors wailed suddenly, their rhythm faltering. John's heart stopped as nurses rushed in, moving quickly. His Margaret cried out, clutching his arm. No, please. John's breath caught, his mind spinning. He leaned close to his father, whispering fiercely, hold on, don't go yet. His father's eyes opened faintly, locking with John's, and in that look everything was said. Love, regret, hope. His lips moved one last time, whispering, live for me. The sound barely audible, yet it struck John like lightning. The nurses worked frantically, but John knew. He pressed his face against his father's hand, sobbing. I promise, he cried, voice breaking. The monitors flattened into silence, filling the room with unbearable finality. John's body shook violently, grief crashing over him like a tidal wave. His Margaret clung to him, and together they broke into the silence. The room was silent now, the monitors dead. John sat frozen, his hand still holding his father's, cold and lifeless. His Margaret sobbed quietly, her head bowed against the bed. John's mind spun with echoes, his father's last words, the weight of truth, the promise he made. He whispered, I'll live for you. The words trembled in the air, fragile yet real. He closed his eyes, pressing his lips against the back of his father's hand one final time. His chest ached, grief carving deep wounds, but he felt a flicker of resolve. His Margaret touched his shoulder gently, whispering, We'll survive this together. John nodded, though tears still poured freely. He knew the pain would linger forever, yet he also knew his father's love would guide him. The hospital staff cleared quietly, leaving John and his Margaret alone in the room. The silence pressed on them, heavy and raw. John stood slowly, feeling as though his legs carried stone. His Margaret's voice cracked. "We have to say goodbye." John shook his head, his throat tightening. "I'm not ready." She nodded, tears glistening. "Neither am I, but we must." Together they leaned over, their hands resting on his father's chest. John whispered, "Thank you, Dad, for everything." His Margaret's sobs shook the room. John pressed his forehead to the still body, grief overwhelming him. Yet, beneath the pain, he felt a faint thread of strength, a reminder of love that would never fade. Leaving the room was harder than John imagined. He walked slowly beside his Margaret, the corridor stretching endlessly ahead. Every step echoed with grief. He whispered, "It feels wrong to leave him behind." His Margaret clutched his arm, whispering, "He'll never leave us." John's chest ached, but her words planted a seed of comfort. The world outside seemed unchanged, yet John felt shattered, unmoored. He stepped through the hospital doors into the cool night air, tilting his face upward. Stars flickered faintly above, and he whispered softly, "Are you watching me now?" The wind brushed his face, gentle and cold, carrying silence that felt almost like an answer. Days later, John sat alone in his father's study. The room smelled faintly of old books and cedar. Dust floated in the morning light, cutting through blinds. He ran his fingers across the desk, tracing grooves his father once made with heavy hands. On the shelf rested his father's watch, worn and scratched. John picked it up, holding it tight. He whispered, "I'll carry you with me." His chest swelled with grief, but also with purpose. He remembered his father's last words, "Live for me," echoing in his soul. He knew life would never be the same, yet the promise gave him a path forward. He pressed the watch against his chest, closing his eyes, letting the memory become strength. John stood at his father's graveside, the earth freshly turned, flowers resting atop. His Margaret stood beside him, silent tears streaking her cheeks. John's heart pounded as he whispered, "I'll live, Dad, for you." He closed his eyes, a tear sliding down, the wind rustling gently around him. The world felt both empty and full, the ache of loss bound with the weight of love. He pressed the watch into his palm, grounding himself. His Margaret slipped her hand into his, their grief shared but their bond unbroken. John whispered again, softer, "I'll make you proud." The silence stretched, heavy but peaceful. He lifted his face to the sky, eyes wet but steady, holding on to both pain and love as one. The promise lingered, eternal,